President Donald Trump is celebrating the release of American pastor Andrew Brunson. This morning, he fired off a series of tweets about it, ending with one line in all caps: "Pastor Brunson just released, will be home soon." But this comes as the president is facing increasing pressure over the disappearance of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, a frequent critic of Saudi Arabia's royal family. Speaking from the Oval Office yesterday, the president said the United States is still gathering information, but pushed back on the idea of imposing sanctions or curbing arms sales. National Security Advisor John Bolton also had this to say.
Honestly, we just don't know what the facts are. And that was one of the points that I made to the Crown Prince. We need to find out what the facts are, and we need to get this resolved quickly.
Joining me now, Ryan Grimm. He's the D.C. bureau chief for the Intercept. Ryan, the Trump administration clearly appears to be hedging its bets on how to respond to this disappearance. They say they want to wait for the hard evidence, or do you think at some point they're just worried at this point about what this will do to U.S.-Saudi relations?
Oh, that's entirely what's going on here. You even saw the president inch up to admitting that Khashoggi was murdered in the consulate. He said yesterday it's beginning to look that way, but then in the same breath said there are a lot of jobs at stake, and so it would be counterproductive to stop selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. One of the cornerstones of Trump's and Jared Kushner's foreign policy has been to elevate Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and to tighten relations with Saudi Arabia and to give him a free hand as he's engaged in a lot of impulsive and reckless behavior, from a blockade of Qatar to an endless war that's sparking a famine in Yemen, and now to this, the apparent assassination of a Virginia resident in the consulate in Istanbul. And so the president would much rather just keep the relationship moving forward. And I think it annoys him that he's having to deal with this. And that was reflected in his initial comment where he said, "I don't like hearing about this, and hopefully it will work itself out."
Work itself out. What's the message if the president doesn't take a stance at this point?
Well, he's getting pushed hard. I mean, I think he's clearly sent his message, which that he doesn't care much about this. But he's still going to be under an extraordinary amount of pressure from both Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill. The question is whether or not the kind of foreign policy establishment starts to turn on Saudi Arabia as well. So far, there's been some movement from media figures, some movement from tech companies that are backing away from a conference, but not a lot from the D.C. foreign policy establishment, which is heavily funded by Saudi Arabia and also by the United Arab Emirates, which was the patron of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and it puts them in a very difficult position. You can imagine yourself as a career foreign policy person. Mm-hmm. You've made a lot of compromises along the way as you've taken money from places that might cause conflicts here or there, and now all of a sudden somebody has been taken apart with a bone saw. And you're like, how did I get here? And the question is, do you speak up at that point and risk everything that you've built, or do you stay quiet?
So we know, Ryan, that Congress is applying pressure on the Trump administration, but are there really any steps that Congress can take?
Well, one step they took was to trigger a sanctions investigation. They absolutely could pass legislation that curtails defense spending. That's not impossible. Saudi very much cares about legislation around the litigation that opens them up to culpability for Saudi involvement in 9/11. That's an expensive and high-profile issue on Capitol Hill. So if that tilts against them, that's a problem as well. But going forward, there could be some Israel parallels here. The way that Israel was, for a very long time, a bipartisan issue. Everybody supported everything that Israel did. Now, Democrats are much more skeptical and willing to be critical of Israeli settlements or other Israeli policy. You could see the same thing happen with Saudi Arabia, with Republicans after a while going back to supporting Saudi Arabia and Democrats unwilling to do so and treating the alliance skeptically. And if Democrats, or when Democrats come back to power, that could make Mohammed bin Salman toxic.
Speaking of U.S. foreign policy, we've been watching Dina Powell. She decided to officially take her name out of the running to replace Nikki Haley as UN ambassador to the U.S. U.S. ambassador U.S. ambassador to the UN. That's what it is. So what exactly is the word on the street? Why did she pull herself from this job?
Well, the timing for her was terrible with this diplomatic crisis unfolding, particularly as it involves centrally her good friend, Jared Kushner. Nobody is more responsible for the rise of bin Salman than Jared Kushner. Kushner and Dina Powell together traveled to Riyadh last year for what became a controversial meeting. We at the Intercept later reported that bin Salman was telling people after that meeting that he had Jared Kushner, quote, in his pocket, and that Kushner had divulged intelligence to him, particularly as it related to Saudis who were disloyal to the Crown Prince and who were agitating behind the scenes. That reporting takes on new meaning now with bin Salman's involvement with this apparent assassination. And so Dina Powell, who was also on that trip, going under oath in this moment during confirmation hearings, might have been something of a spectacle. So, that certainly could have something to do with it. She might also have gotten indication that Sheldon Adelson just didn't approve of her and had a different candidate. And Adelson is effectively able to kind of appoint the UN ambassador. Trump is not going to veto Adelson here.
Why is that?
Adelson is effectively Trump's patron, and his number one issue is Israel. The place that the United States defends Israel's interests is in the United Nations. So Adelson wants somebody who he can trust 100% in that capacity, and Dina Powell is unlikely to be that person.
So, Ryan, speaking of the president, I want to ask you, his legal team is now preparing written answers to questions that were provided by the special counsel, Robert Mueller's team. They're then going to meet with the president to go over those written answers in the next couple of weeks. First off, I want to ask you, do you think cameras will be there? We remember back to Bill Clinton. Will we see this? And what are the reasons that you think the Mueller's team would agree to going this route?
Well, they don't have all of the leverage, and so they have to take in some ways what they can get with the leverage that they do have. And I suspect that President Trump will treat this as he does a lot of issues, whether it's meeting with Kim Jong-un, et cetera, as kind of a rose ceremony or a reality TV show finale. Will there be cameras? Won't there be cameras? Will it happen? Won't it happen? He'll cancel it several times, and then and then he'll reschedule it. Keeping the viewers interested so the ratings stay high.
I want to ask you about midterms, Ryan. Right. We've been watching Texas Congressman. Boy, has this been a fascinating race to watch. Beto O'Rourke. The grassroots efforts that he's made, the Senate campaign, he's actually raised, is this right, Ryan, $38 million in the third quarter. I don't think President Obama raised that for one single race in the third quarter. I mean, in any quarter at this point. We know that he's trailing at this point Senator Ted Cruz in the latest poll. But how significant is this, the cash haul and the movement that he's made in Texas?
Well, it's huge, and that's just the money that's gone to Beto O'Rourke. You have people as varied as the House Democratic Super PAC and Michael Avenatti and others using Beto O'Rourke's name to raise money for their own causes and not necessarily spending it on Beto O'Rourke. So, you have to kind of multiply that $38 million because people were trying to give more to Beto O'Rourke, but there's become an entire industry around fundraising. Just mention Beto's name and you're going to start raking in cash. One thing this shows is how the party leadership doesn't necessarily control strategy anymore. They would never have said, what we need to do is spend $38 million in this quarter on this race. In fact, they had no plans on seriously contesting Texas at all. But Beto O'Rourke decided to run, and regular people from around the country decided that they wanted to give Ted Cruz a run for his money. And at minimum, what it has done is it has forced Republicans to spend a lot of time, energy, and money in Texas that they otherwise would be spending elsewhere. And that's a very expensive proposition for them. So that alone is a win for Democrats if it can help people in some other states. But like you said, the structural disadvantages for Democrats when it comes to voter suppression, and also the general demographics and conservative lean in the state are going to be difficult for him to overcome. Absolutely
fascinating. Looking forward to seeing how things shape up in November. Ryan Grim, always grateful to have you on to chat politics.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.